Hi folks, you think here and welcome back to my channel. In this video I want to discuss a topic that SciManDan addressed, and it's about rockets in space. Can rockets fly in space? So here's SciManDan, and there's something that I'm going to address as well.
They didn't listen during their science lessons as a kid.
So look, it's important that we listen, but also to think. When I see this about Newton's orbital cannon, that if a cannon fires a projectile, that projectile, if you fire it hard enough, will orbit the Earth. It's complete garbage. Simply because the Earth must rotate and it's moving. So the cannonball can't just move around the Earth like they're saying. So the problem. So I know that Newton is a moron and this teacher's nothing more than a puppet. So it's not just about listening, but you need to reason and think and question. Now I'm going to address something else about SciManDan. And it's a serious problem. And I'm going to show you something, and I'll show you why I understand these things. It's about psychological conditioning. So when I was younger, I was an instructor in the military. I was involved in instructing troops from a few countries in Africa, including Israel. And I was involved in wars in more than one country when I was younger. So we're talking about psychological conditioning. So I want to show you why this is a problem, and I'm going to show you how SciManDan uses a technique that I understand and I recognize comes from psychological conditioning. So psychological conditioning, right, there's three phases. First, you have a system. That might be a military, political system, a religious system, whatever. You create an environment where normal behavior and attitudes no longer function for the individual. So this process is called unfreezing. The second step then is you give strong cues and examples of the appropriate behavior and attitude or understanding that you want. That involves the change, and you use media to do this. The third step is reinforce the new behaviors and attitudes. This step is called refreeze. So this is what SciManDan is using, this refreeze, and I'm going to show you exactly how it works. Well, the result is that it creates obedience. The problem is, and why this is not good for you, is that it can create moral damage. So normally a person understands the difference between right and wrong. But after going through this process, they flip. So wrong becomes right and right becomes wrong. And of course in the military they use it because that for you to go and kill somebody is not a normal thing. You need to go through this process because then you'll be in the right mindset to kill people, which is not, it goes against our human nature. So if I show you this picture of the ship, you'd say, well, no, that looks funny. There's something wrong with it, right? So let's talk about unfreezing. So a political system, right, will create its own problems internally, do things that are quite traumatic to its own citizens. They'll do this when they want to bring in a new change. Right, so the second bit is then they will give strong clues and examples of the appropriate behavior through the media. And this generates the change, and the change is then accepted by the masses. So let's look at the media. Media, when I say to you a medium, it will be including the movies, television, music, and print, and so forth. Right. So let's just talk a bit about science, or is it ceremonial magic, make-believe? So Aleister Crowley, he was heavily involved in ceremonial magic, and so was Marvel Parson, also called Jack Parson. He was one of the early fathers of rocket science. So here he is holding up an explosive. Walt Disney also involved in ceremonial magic. Right? And Werner von Braun was the top dog in NASA. So they all collaborated and worked together and used different media to get their message across and to get the buy-in from the public and the citizens. But you need to understand that this really isn't good for the person. The process, because it's not true, it's not reality. So let's talk a bit about reinforcing of the new behaviors and attitudes, the refreeze bit. So if I show you that ship, you'd say, no, there's a problem with it. But if I show you this, you'll say, no, this is perfectly fine. But in reality, a spaceship, it's the same thing. Neither of these are actually real. So it results in moral damage that you accept things that were wrong before, but now they become right. And when you go back and you analyze it, you look at it the second time and you say, no, wait a minute, that's not right. So let's talk about refreezing. So often you'll find a lot of these people that will respond. So this is how they would respond. It's about dehumanizing somebody, making them feel stupid, making them question themselves. So it's gaslighting. And the result is that it's not that you want them to listen, but you want them to be obedient. So they'll use phrases like, it's embarrassing, you flirts don't understand 8th grade physics. So how do you combat them? Well, you let them know, look, I'm not interested in what you think. Right? Here's a good example. A Zulu warrior, right? They have a saying called Ngihi Bupezi. Means I'm a lion. If you go to a Zulu, right, and you saying to him, look, I'm your master, and you must listen to me, you're going to have big, big problems. Because he'll let you know you're not his master, right? You're nothing to this man. They will chew you up and spit you out and piss on your bones. They don't work like that. And so you need to develop that same attitude that a person can have a master's degree. You don't have to listen to him. The person like that who's trying to dominate you has no authority over you whatsoever. So stand up and take your power back. That's how you defeat him. So, remember, it's about, they want your obedience. Right? And so they need to dominate you and sometimes humiliate you. That's part of the refreeze process. So it's a system of social conditioning. Right? And very few see the deliberate manipulation. Those that do, don't fall for it and don't allow themselves to be manipulated by it. So now I'm going to show you how SciManDan is going to address a topic which we will discuss, but I'm first going to show you how he first uses these techniques, right, to refreeze. So let's have a look and I'll explain it.
To hear that this meme this week is founded on misunderstanding and poor education.
Right, so it's misunderstanding, poor education. They said that there's something wrong with you, right? Remember, he wants you to listen. In other words, he wants you to be obedient. Right? That there's something wrong with you. If you can reason and think for yourself, then you're uneducated, there's something wrong with you, which is not true. It's gaslighting you.
This is the meme in question, and I bet you've heard this argument before at some point on a video or a social media post.
Right, so this is the main topic and we're going to get to that. But first, SciManDan is going to do some more refreezing.
We will, of course, address the 2 points separately. But first, I want to express my disappointment that a meme like this has been made in the first
place. So he's disappointed. Remember, that's part about the refreezing. You've disappointed him. He's your master. He owns you. Remember, he's trying to get you to obey him. So that's what they do in the army, right? It's the same technique.
Now, this has either been made, this meme, by a blind follower who's heard this argument from their favourite flurf.
Right, so now he uses you as indirectly, a blind follower. So if you see something, he won't say that you blind, he will say a blind follower. So he's redirecting now, but in fact it's intended to you. Remember, this is part of about the refreezing.
Or a flurf content creator who knows this isn't true.
Right, so whoever helped you to understand something, that person who helped you, he knew that what he was saying wasn't true, he was lying to you. So you're an idiot and you've been misled. Remember, he's gaslighting you. That's part about, that's how that process of refreezing works.
Either way, it's a problem. It's a dangerous meme.
Right. Really, it's a dangerous meme. Right. There's a lion scurrying up a tree. What's made this lion afraid? A meme. Here's a meme for you. Why doesn't NASA use the cheaper, lighter GoPro plastic and wrap that around their re-entry vehicles? Because you can send a GoPro on a balloon into the stratosphere and it just falls down and it works fine. It doesn't get burnt on its re-entry. I'll say, well, that's because there's no air. Exactly, dumbass. Think about it.
It's a dangerous meme.
Right, it's danger to them because they don't want you to reason and think.
Because I believe it's one of those memes that makes sense to the layman or average person.
So remember, wena bubezi. You're a warrior. You're the lion. Don't let people intimidate you. You have no master except yourself. You're the master of your own mind and thoughts. Right, so it's more refreezing the layman or average person. And it's gaslighting you, saying that you're not smart enough to work it out. Right, so if you've come to a conclusion, then that conclusion is wrong because there's something wrong with you. You're not smart enough. So all of this nonsense that we just looked at refreezing, he had to do that first because he needs your obedience and a buy-in. So there's psychological manipulation going on here. You need to understand why it's not good for you, because your understanding of what is right and wrong can be affected. So don't allow people to manipulate you. So let's deal with the topics.
Rocket combustion is not a normal fire. In a rocket engine there are two primary propellants, a fuel and an oxidizer. Now these are mixed and exploded in a combustion chamber.
Right, so we're talking about internal combustion. There's nothing special about it, right? So it's my personal opinion that I believe that NASA would deliberately at times blow things up, to blur the lines between something that's a projectile that's flying or something that's exploding. Right, so we're talking about internal combustion and thrust. So let's just put things into perspective.
Usually required. Of course, the combustion itself is not enough to make the rocket work. It needs to be concentrated through that nozzle to get the thrust required.
Right, so an internal combustion engine, right? So what he's talking about is the same thing. Let's just say that the oxygen's internal. It's the same thing. Nothing's changed. That creates a torque. The torque then has to be transferred into thrust. So thrust isn't the engine or the power, but the generated force's ability to create the forward motion that is required. So what creates the thrust? So with a motor vehicle, then it would be the tires. But we need to understand that the explosions that's happening in the internal combustion engine, right, isn't the thrust. When you drive your car, it's under control. You can control the amount of thrust. You control the torque. Then you can steer. In other words, you need to drive. Right? We're not talking about blowing things up here. Right? There's a lot of power, right? But it's under control. So here's a motorbike. The torque is in the engine, the power and the torque is in the engine, is transferred to the torque on the back wheel. That back wheel then translates that torque into thrust. It's the back wheel. Now if I put this motorbike in space and I say to you, well now the thrust actually becomes the small little nozzle, the tiny bit of the exhaust pipe. It's not the same thing. Right. How much thrust is there in the exhaust pipe of a motorbike? Very little. Because what you will have is just a motorbike flip-flopping in space. You need the road, not just for the thrust, but to get from A to B. Balance, control, stopping power. They all work together. So here's a rocket. If I put an engine in this capsule, where's the capsule going? What's keeping its balance? It's in a vacuum. If you're inside, if you turn to the left and to the right, you're going to be flip-flopping all over the show. Right? Makes no sense. So if there is no medium, then there's no ability to create the thrust. So SciManDan doesn't actually address the actual issue. How the power is translated into thrust. For example, in an aeroplane, you have an internal combustion engine. The thrust is generated by the props. Right? That for that aeroplane to fly, you need the wings, and it's under control. It's called flying. It's got nothing to do with the explosions that's happening inside the internal combustion engine. Nothing at all. If the engine cuts out, you can change the angle of the prop blades to reduce drag. But nevertheless, you're flying. So understand the difference. This is a cartoon. If I shoot a bullet from a rifle, there's an explosion, there was thrust, but is this flying? Can you get on this thing and fly it in space? So before NASA sent off the rockets, right, they had a lot of stage shows, shooting cannons to the moon, getting people for that mindset. So the youngsters that grew up with this, by the time they were older, then the rocket stage was set. So think about it. If there is no medium, then there is no ability to create the thrust. The power cannot be translated into thrust. So let's have a look. So if I put a jet in space, and you're saying, well, the jet has thrust, okay, it has internal oxygen. Where's this jet going? How's it keeping its balance? Where's the pilot going? So they'll say, no, well, a jet can't fly in space, but you can shoot a rubbish bin into space, and it'll fly in space. What's the difference? Thrust. Well, what's the difference in thrust? Can a jet fly in space? Has it enough thrust? No. If I take a jet and I remove its wings and its tail, now it's a rocket. It's the same thing. It won't fly. Is this flying or is this flip-flopping? It's going to be just spinning around like a useless thing. Even if you say that there is thrust in space, that's the result. Thrust. So a horse can thrust you off itself, right? There you're flying. No, you're not flying, because you're going to land in horse shit on the other side. So the braking or stopping power must match the horsepower thrust. If it doesn't, then it's horse shit. A flying horse in space is horse shit. That's what they're selling you. This is a cartoon. So let's listen to SciManDan. Let's add in a few more details.
On nicely to point number 2, no medium to push against in the vacuum of space. Now, I understand what the flirts are trying to imply here.
Right, so the more refreezing, right? What flirts are trying to imply. No, it's not what we're implying, it's what we're saying. That it's not possible.
A boat pushes against water to obtain thrust. A plane, the air itself. And a road vehicle, the road. So their argument is a vacuum contains nothing, therefore there's nothing to push against.
Listen, right? No. What's the difference? So listen carefully. SciManDan doesn't address the issue. A boat doesn't go in the water to create thrust. It goes from water to get from point A to point B. It uses thrust to turn, to navigate. You have to navigate. Thrust is part of that process. A motorbike, he's using thrust, but he's also going from point A to point B. So he has thrust, right? But the thrust in this system is limited. This person's not going to go to the moon if you give them an unlimited supply of water. It's limited. The amount of power is limited. What about a Sukhoi, right? It can, on level ground, on level flight, Mach 2. But if it goes straight up, it eventually slows down and stalls. They say, well, the air's thin. Exactly. So the wings are useless, because there's no air. So how then does a rocket actually fly in space? How does it navigate? Fly to? What is your map? you're going to fly from point A to point B based on what? How do you navigate? What is up and what is down? There is no up and there is no down. So do you understand? It's a system of disorientation. And that's by deliberate design.
Newton's 3 laws of motion are taught at a relatively young age here in the UK, and probably around the world as well. Specifically Law 3, which says, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. This law is the principle of how rockets work in space. It does not require an external medium like air or water to push against.
Right. So this moron made up a law, right, Isaac Newton, that says rockets can fly in space. Why? Because he's a magician. The problem is reality requires a medium for you to move in or on. A bird needs air to fly in. A boat needs water to navigate on. A car needs a road to drive on. But when you're in space, nah, you just can fly in nothing. You can fly a rocket in nothing, and you'll get from point A to point B, because this clown said so, and he gave you a law that says so. Does it make it real? No. He's a magician, he's a bullshit artist. Right? It's part of the manipulation. Right? It's part of the ceremonial magic, the make-believe. It's garbage. Rubbish.
Instead, it involves the internal forces within the rocket. In space there's no air, but this does not matter. The rocket is not pushing against air. It is expelling mass exhaust gases in one direction, and that propels it in the opposite direction.
Like this. There's a garbage can, right? Put an explosion under the garbage can. Alright, so remember what I said to you, that part about the make-believe is you need to understand the difference between exploding a projectile and something that is actually flying.
Either way, it's a problem. It's a dangerous meme.
So NASA exploding stuff to the moon? No. So is this thrust? No, it's an explosion. Right. They're just trying to bamboozle you. If I shoot a bullet from a gun, then this little man's going to get on it and he's going to fly to the moon. It's not real. It's a cartoon. So everything that goes up, you make an explosion under the bin that creates the thrust. But is this rubbish bin flying? No, eventually it comes down. Everything that goes up must come down, including NASA's rockets. They don't go into outer space. There is no outer space. It doesn't exist. But they need to create the make-believe. That's all it is. They need to create the make-believe. But this is reality. It's garbage. NASA's rubbish can. It's a flying rubbish can. You say, well, look, here's a photograph. Or look, there's a horizon. How big do you think this ball Earth is? It's a bamboozle. It's bullshit.
Either way, it's a problem. It's a dangerous meme.
Right? So think about it. You need to listen and think. Because as soon as you start thinking, you become dangerous. They can't have that. If you stand up for yourself, you become dangerous. So I want you to reason, question, and think. It's your right to. It's your mind. It's your life. You are entitled to believe whatever you want to believe. No one has authority over your heart and mind except you. No teacher can tell you what to believe. Even if they believe in Newton, the dumbass magician, he's a fraud. Same with Albert Einstein. He makes up freaking laws and says, no, it's possible because I made up this law.
Of course, the problem is they didn't listen during their...
Right, so don't give in to their refreezing. Understand what they're doing. It's a process, right? And if you just reason and think about what they're saying, you'll see for yourself it's complete garbage. It's bullshit. Right? Right. And thing is, we did listen, but we don't believe the horseshit and the magic stories. We refuse to bow down and comply because what you're telling us is absolute horseshit. And it's part of the control. It's ceremonial magic, make believe. So, I hope this clip has helped you to reason and think. And look, keep your power, reason and think, and draw your own conclusions. Cheers and thanks for watching.